Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. This episode is Lacey. You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts, wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about travel time. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just More Fix. So today we are going to talk about travel time. So one of these huge or do you want to set this one up? Because it's your idea. You set this up because this is your idea. So I'm going to shut up.
So I was driving in the car, and that got me thinking about traveling between location RPGs. And it's pretty much the same. We all got places to go with our characters. And so you're like, well, it's 3 days to get there. Day one passes,
over there. Yeah.
and it's uneventful. Mm-hmm. Day two passes. Watch number 2 that I rolled randomly. Ambush of goblins. Da, da, da. The party succeeds, or maybe you killed them all. I don't know. Most likely the party succeeds.
See the previous episode of TPK?
The next day, nothing happens. And we arrive so that we can begin our adventure. So I'm sort of like, either skip that time altogether and hop to where you arrive in town, or make your travel meaningful. I would prefer option 2.
So skipping to the next adventure?
No, that was...
Oh, okay. Kind of. Thinking of Yellow King LARP. So, okay, well, let's with all that, right, let's go back to some source material for, like, why this is a thing, right? So the original is Tolkien, right? And I feel like, having never actually read more than the first 50 pages of the first book, I know in the stories, people talk about how much, like, you really get the feeling that they have all this travel, this arduous journey and whatever. And I would say that even in the movies... It
takes, like, a billion words to tell you about it, so right? It's clearly...
They just want you to suffer.
It's a lengthy journey.
Through all that, right? Yeah. But in the movies, they do a pretty good job of conveying that. And granted, crazy, amazing landscape shots, wide angle, you can cross these crazy stuff.
Shout out to New Zealand.
Right, exactly. And so you definitely get the feeling in those movies that, wow, they're on a mountaintop that's kind of got some grass on it. And now they're on a mountaintop that has a lot of snow. And now they're in a cave. And now they're on another mountaintop. And now they're on some plains. And now they're on another mountaintop, And so, like, I really feel like that movie is 2 hours, 45 minutes. If you cut out all that adventure, the time between the adventures. I was picturing
the whole series of these. That's way more 2 hours.
But yeah, no, but like in one movie, right there, I think they probably average 2:45, right? But if you cut out all that stuff in the adventure, you're probably down to 90 minutes, I would probably guess, right? So first off, I guess to say, do you think there's value in trying to convey how hard that journey is?
The whole...
Okay. Well, that's what because my thought, first, when I don't know which way I come down on this, right? One, I think if you're going to do it, make it interesting, right? That's the first thing. Basically, rule number 1, if you're going to do something, make sure it's interesting.
I don't know if the people listening have done a lot of hiking, backpacking, or whatever, fighting, at least, pretend fighting, whether you're doing jujitsu or SCA or whatever, it's active. And while your mind is working and processing, there's not necessarily a lot of personal growth happening at that moment.
Right.
Right. When it comes to walking a long distance, there's a level of perseverance and just willingness to continue suffering when I could just stop. I could just stop walking.
Right.
It's just me. I'm the only one here keeping track of why I'm doing this.
Right. No, I agree.
I mean, at least in that story, there's this greater sense of whatever, but that true, that personal growth that you see that happen with the characters in that story are born in those quiet times.
Right. No, I agree with that a whole lot. So
I don't know that necessarily the role-playing game.
Well, that's actually kind of where I'm going to go, because I just wrote down character growth versus game, right? So I think that there are some games that do a better job of supporting this mechanic, right? So whether that's a game that tracks some kind of mental stress, games that sort of where harm is abstracted, right? So it's like in Apocalypse World, you just have harm. You don't have necessarily, or depending on which version of a PTA game you're playing, some of the harm might just be mental stress or physical physical stress, or both, right? So I see where you're going, but in the context of a lot of games for like OSR stuff or D&D or Pathfinder or, DCC, whatever it is, that doesn't really factor in there. So,
well, I feel like mechanically you almost need like if you're talking about that sort of thing, like a fatigue tracker or like a mental stress or subtle damage.
So let me ask you this. A lot of games add like a corruption track. So where there's some kind of like entitleness in the world that kind of like corrupts as time goes by. So would you think that if you had that already in the game, that like an overland journey where you had time to process some seclusion and time to just, be alone with your thoughts or whatever, do you think it would be fair to say to like reduce that by like whether it's 1 point or like a D2 or D3 or something?
I think that's cool, but it also ends up being like resting, right? You're like, okay, now I'm done. Can I change this on my character sheet now?
True.
How many hit points can I have back? Like you still didn't have. And I guess to me, like in character conversation in this travel time is always kind of a funny thing too. It's like if you start to have a conversation and try to like add some role playing in there, like there's this feeling as a GM, like you got to push to get to the next thing. And maybe you might have players that want to talk but then you're just kind of pushing the next thing, or nobody really knows what to do at that time. And you're always just like sitting there at the table like, well, what's the next thing?
Right.
So I don't know, I guess, what would improve the role-playing aspect of travel time. I have some other ideas about like encounter stuff, but how to get people to just like freely role play with no other incentive. You know what I mean?
It's kind of strange that you talk about it this way, because when you mentioned this when we were in the car, I was like, oh, this could be kind of cool. And my mind immediately went to like encounters and like things that keep you active between the adventures.
Well, I 100% agree that the time that needs work too.
All right. No, I agree as well. But like that's where my mind initially went. And I have done loads of backpacking. I have hiked hundreds of miles, not in one sitting, but like, over time, an 80-mile trip here, a 50-mile trip there. And I can tell you there is a crazy amount of levity, at least for me personally, that comes from doing that, right? Like you said, the learning to endure, the suffering, the sort of the puzzling out you have to do to figure out I've got a water I can get here. And now my next place I think I can get water according to my map is however many miles down the road.
And we're rolling survival checks or we're rolling tracking bushcraft or, whatever the relevant to the system. But, it just doesn't come across as something interesting or, and it's just sort of like, okay, well, you pass. So this day goes well. There's less description of what goes well, what doesn't go well.
It's weird to me because like I've never made that connection in my own mind. You know what I'm saying? For whatever reason, I just, I guess there was a wall between two and then neither between each other, right? For whatever reason. And
I think it would be kind of interesting if you could use travel time like almost like a downtime action, right? So like in like LARPs or like World of Darkness, right? You can say, okay, well, I'm going to spend this section of my time learning how to fluently speak Spanish, right? Like if you could use your travel time, like, okay, this time I'm going to focus on hunting. And so I'm going to increase this skill. Like and then that would almost give you, so this is your character's goal for this journey, because I can't just imagine that you literally just spent, half, probably over half of your life walking to the next place.
One of the problems with the way the level systems work, though, is that there's not incremental progression. It's just chunk, right? Whereas in something like Burning Wheel or World of Darkness, where you're getting experience and spending it, to inch your skills and powers up and that kind of stuff. So I don't. Dust has it as well. Degenis. I don't know. It's just an interesting thought. And
I don't know. Do you have any ideas on how you could, like, as a GM, prompt inter-player interaction during that time period?
So,
I mean, I know a lot of times we ask, is there anything we want to accomplish on this journey? And sometimes that helps. Does anybody have anything that they want to be doing while this is going on? But even then, most, a lot of times you get like a shrug.
As we sit here, I think this could be, not even could be, I think this is something to sit on and think for a little bit and to develop out more, right? But initially, my thoughts are, one, I think this is something you have a conversation with the people at the table initially to say, we're going to focus on some, however you want to say it, downtime action, travel time actions and that kind of stuff, right? And maybe if you're playing in a game that's more of a D&D style game with a level style progression, we just say that we're going to focus on interpersonal stuff and relationship and contact stuff, right? Not necessarily gaining skills or whatever. Or if you wanted to say, cool, if you want to do that, so you're going to focus on your hunting and tracking, right? Okay, okay, so make a bushcraft check, right? So, and then depending on how well you do on the roll could dictate how much experience you get, right? I don't think if you fail it, you gain nothing, because I think that's kind of crappy. First off, it's like, otherwise, why are we even doing this? It's just a die roll to see, do I get experience, yes or no, right? So if you succeed, then you get some experience. If you fail, then maybe we get like a small encounter or something, but you're still going to gain something because you learn more from your failures and successes, right?
Right.
So I think you could, if
a very burning wheel experience sort of model.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I like.
I like absolutely.
I failure.
I think it's one of the coolest advancement systems that are out there. But setting that aside, right? If we're going to focus on like our interpersonal stuff, maybe we set it up more of where I think it may take some initial work on the front end of things, where we're talking about what is the relationship of our characters like. So why are we traveling? And it doesn't have to be deep questions. It can be very superficial. Why are our characters traveling together? How do I see how I fit into this party of people, right? How do I, do your relationship map? So I just have an arrow pointing to each character that says that the fighter's an idiot, and he's just there to be an arrow sponge and to stand in front of me while I cast spells, right? And then the rogue, can't trust him, but man, is he good at backstabbing people, and however that looks like. And then in between these sessions, we could say, what is it? Are you trying to learn anything about someone? Are you trying to change the way someone perceives? And then do whether you want to role play that, fine.
Like a mandatory relationship goal for people at the table.
Right.
I like the idea of that. Like, write down a goal that you want to accomplish, like relevant to a relationship with someone at the table, and you get extra experience at the end of the session if you've worked towards accomplishing that goal.
Well, and then I'm thinking there's something similar to a success, a fail, and then some kind of grade between, right? So there's going to be a die roll that's made, right? So we establish what our goals are. But if we want to role play through it, that's great. If we want to do it in more of sort of a PTA way, where it's like, I'm going to make a roll and there's a pick list, and then we pick one of these 2 or 3 things, and then that's what happened, and we kind of role play towards that end, or however you want to do that, right? If you want to do it in just more of a pick list mechanical way, maybe
that seems like...
Well, what I'm saying is I'm saying several options depending on what suits your table, right? So if your table isn't interested in these interpersonal role-playing moments, then it's just, what if we have just a pretty straightforward like PBTA style pick list, right? So if you roll a d20 plus your charisma modifier, over 15 is this, under 10 is this, and then, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
but I feel like if your table's not interested in that, then just don't do it. Continue to travel as you've always traveled, not talking to each other.
Right.
And
well, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure some way to make this work in there if you want to try and introduce it into players that maybe aren't interested in it initially for somewhere to build from.
I really think experience at the back end, if you've worked towards a complex kind of relationship goal. So whether it's, I'm going to try and, ingratiate myself with the cleric.
Okay, so I'm going to say
I'm going to try and form a romantic relationship with the bard, whatever.
Provided what you set up initially has some kind of conflict built into it. Not necessarily conflict that's going to rise to physical violence, but there has to be some kind of...
Right, well, it would have to be a change from the current relationship status.
Otherwise it's running around playing patty cake for experience.
Or, I'm going to try and sow dissent between these other 2 players. Like, that could be...
So I think there's something there, but I don't know. It's interesting. But I think you need to have some kind of gradient there where it's not all yes or all no. I think that, becomes to be a little uninteresting. Also, in a way, it can make charisma matter more because, charisma's kind of a dump stat until you talk to the noble or you're negotiating a price or something or whatever, right?
Trying to get people following.
But if you realize...
that aren't in your party.
Yeah. If you realize, though, that I can actually sway opinions of people in our group in between, journeys, a lot that can change things.
I've done that at the table with our kids, too, and they're always like, oh, and you're like, oh, who's leading? And everybody's like, oh, I am. And they all 3 say it. I'm like, well, who has the highest charisma? Or why don't we make a charisma check and see who people are actually going to follow?
Right.
That's your leadership. That's talking to things they are against their better judgment.
Yeah. So I think depending on the style of game you have, some rules will already support it. So things like if you're playing Dungeon World or something like that, PBTA style games, right? You already have an eyeball thing, or you already have a move that is like coerce someone to get them to do what you want, right? So at that point, I think it's just activating a move, but it's on a longer time scale, right? And that's what with those games, that's where I would go to immediately. Now, in the case of D&D, I think it's you're gonna have to massage things a little more, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think that's something that we can definitely kind of like look at further or whatever, right? So
let's talk about actual encounters on the journey, like less interplayer and external encounters.
Right. So first off, I think it's important to note and say that I guess I got 2 things. One, it needs to be more interesting than, hey, it's an ambushed by Monster X on Watch X, and let's see how much this taxes you in a way that doesn't matter because this is going to happen. Then you're going to be able to heal fully before we get to the next town for where the actual next adventure happens, right?
Okay, I'm saying that that's an okay encounter to have, but it shouldn't be the only one you have every single time.
Well, I think that's an okay place to start, but I think you need to build it out more and make it more about like why is this happening?
I would be willing to bet that somewhere out there there are probably multiple random travel encounter tables that you could consult, and I think this is an okay place to use them.
I agree, but the problem that I have with a lot of those is a lot of them are pretty flat, and this is my problem with a lot of random encounter tables.
You can always make your own.
I don't disagree.
Substitute things that aren't interesting, but it might be a good place for you to get some ideas.
Right. No, I agree. That part I agree. My problem with a lot of those tables are they're just flat and boring. They are uninteresting tables that is just overturned wagon, 1d4 goblin, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, they're just uninspired and boring. No one wants to read about that encounter. Oh, there was a wagon and 4 goblins. Ooh, exciting. Tell me more. At the same time, I also think important to note that if you I see a trap that you could set yourself up for as a game. Okay. So we're in, I don't know, Solace as a village, right? In Dragonlance. And we have this adventure there and we save the town. Saved it. Great. Now we're going to make our march and we're going to go down to Qualinesti. And that's a little bit of a hike. So now we have this journey to go on and we need to fill this journey with some encounters and things that are going to happen. I already have an entire series of encounters and several sessions planned out for what happens in Qualinesti, but we got to get there first, right?
Right.
So now I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make these interesting encounters. These are going to be really cool. And I've thought them out and they're really good. And then I set them in motion and our players hit them and encounter them and they think, oh man, that's a really cool encounter. We probably ought to go over there and see why that happened. And now we went completely off the rails and all the work that I have done for Qualinesti is now just this cool adventure for the next game I'm going to run or until eventually maybe they get back on track and come back over to where
So I mean, make your adventures, make your encounters on the trail unique, but not looking like hooks, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like,
because I'm going to draw a comparison to some video games, right?
So I'm saying don't rescue some damsel on the side of the road from a troop of goblins because then you're going to hear the damsel's backstory and then you're going to be like, oh, this town is plagued with goblins and get sidetracked. Like, no, stop it.
Or I think there's some moment there too where you could also play on the characters a little bit on their morality to say, we're on the way to solve a problem, an evil problem that is at a level of a 6, right?
Yeah. So do we save the town or do we destroy the One Ring before Saruman takes over the entire world?
I think there's some
Sauron. Saruman.
There's some things you can play with there a little bit because at one point you're going to have like the village. You saved us. Great. We need you to save us all the way. Well, I'm on a timeline here, and this is where we come back to sort of.
Can I take a rain check?
Yeah, but we've talked in the past before about how important and useful time is as a pressure device, right? So yeah, you can totally stay here and set up and wait for the next large ambush of goblin and totally wipe it clean because they're going to come back for revenge. But do you want to spend the week waiting here for that to happen when meanwhile whatever it is 40, 50, 60 miles down the road right now there are people being butchered and whatever the problem is, right? So I guess it could be fun.
Here's my problem with moral dilemmas like that, though, is it's almost like you're begging for them to split party. And then I got to deal with that.
True.
And I don't want to deal with that.
Also, I don't think you don't want to pull that every time, but it could be an interesting problem to put in front of your players.
Yeah.
Especially if you had like goody-goody characters, paladins and,
See, that's what I'm saying. If they're too goody-goody, they're going to split the party.
Maybe not, because they could make a strong argument to say, I understand what you're talking about here.
Maybe you're charisma.
True. But what if we know if I stay here, we're talking about a greater good thing, right? Do I save this village of 50 people and then potentially doom the town of 1,000 to death and torture, right?
Trolley car all over again.
I know, right? But I think there's some fun. There's some fun. At least in my mind, those are the kind of games that I like to play, right? And so I think there's some opportunity there for some good role playing and some moments. But at the same time, it's only a lever you can only pull a couple times before it's like, oh, this again? We already went through this. This is a no-brainer. We let the village go and we go to the town. Sorry for your luck.
Does everyone in the 14th century need help?
Right.
My God.
Yes,
Can't a man just travel?
Yes. Unless they have armor and a sword, like a real sword, yes, they need help. They are starving and pitiful. So, yeah, I don't know. I agree. And so I want to circle back to random tables because there are several games now that have some amazing ones. Okay. So I just want to make it clear, you're the one that came up with this topic and not me. But I do just so happen to have in my hand.
Do you have a random travel table?
From the Morkborg.
You do not.
From the Morkborg cult. This is what I wanted to say. You suggested
Overland travel.
The Overland travel. Now this is for free on the website, the Morkborg cult. So
so slim.
It is. I guess it would be 4 pages, one of which is a cover. So that'd be 1, 2, 3 pages. And so on the left side, it's like a little booklet, right? A zine. It has travel distances, time across the Morkborg world, right? Then on the right hand side of the as you open it up, there is some suggestions here. So I'm just going to kind of go through. So it says keep track of food and water, which if you're going to do overland travel, I'm not a big fan of tracking water and food all the time, but if we're going to do these arduous journeys, it does present some interesting opportunities because now we get into an area where we might have characters that have put points of skills that they want it to be relevant. That's why they put the points there, right? Where they get to use them in
bushcraft, your survival, your hunting, your
foraging, finding water, hunting,
exactly.
that kind of
all
stuff.
Of those are fun. Or even your wizard. Like how many people have, make clean water or what do they call it?
Purify water.
Yeah, purify water. There's one for food, right? That creates,
So along with that, now this is for Morkborg. It's make sure you roll on the calendar to see if another misery happens. So after that, roll for weather. So we get caught up in a lot of this kind of encounters being creatures and monsters and encounters with villages and stuff.
That's totally going to talk about too. Oh my gosh. So yeah, how many times are you traveling in your head? You're picturing a nice flat road, maybe some ruts. It's basically a country road there. There may be some gravel in your mind, right? Normal, I guess deciduous trees, a little shade. How often are you picturing, rolling through mud that's so thick that like things are just like glooping and get sucked into it, or just barren wasteland or bogged, or the list goes on. There's all kinds of different terrain that you can travel through. So and that informs a whole subset of possible mishaps that can occur.
Right. So I'm going to go just straight at weather. So in some of the backpacking and stuff I have done.
Man, I'm just picturing Scump right now.
Holy
Sorry.
cow. Well,
there was sideways rain. There's rain that came up from the bottom.
I'll go even further than that. When I was backpacking New Mexico, the mountains that we were on, one of them is above the, there's nothing on top. It's just rock, right? And a storm rolled in. Now, in modern times, we're wearing like an aluminum backpack, so it's slightly different in a D&D sense, but at the same time, you're probably wearing metal armor. And so a guy was struck by lightning on top of that mountain in a storm while I was out there, okay?
I hadn't even thought about lightning.
Yes.
That's amazing.
So...
that'd be like instant death, though.
Well...
Should you do that? I feel like you kind of should.
Well, you could go off of the call lightning spell, because that's actually what the druids and they're doing is they're regular lightning.
If you don't have the sense to find shelter.
True story. So that's a possibility. I've been through not the worst flash flood, but flash flood conditions while backpacking, which is pretty hairy in and of itself because water is a terrible beast.
Drought.
There's lots and lots of things in terms of not just general weather, right? Oh, it's a nice balmy 72 degrees and the winds are south by southwest,
winds,
right?
Falling trees, falling limbs.
All kinds of potential exists out there.
Landslides, mudslides.
And if you want to make use of some other, visual aids and stuff like that in your game, there's loads of pictures of grass fires and lightning strikes and, flooding waters coming in and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of resources out there that you can make use of easily, but it will add a lot to the game because weather is a huge factor in one, your ability to put down miles to get down the trail, but also there is nothing in this world more miserable that I can tell you than a slow a quick sudden rain and then Midwest oppressive humidity and heat after that, and it is absolutely miserable. I would rather be soaked to the bone and walking in that than that oppressive humidity, right? But it affects everything, right? So just some things to think about because
how do you feel about having to make power checks or stamina check, something like that, to distance travel during a day? Is that too deep? Is that too crunchy? I guess maybe it depends on the table you're at.
I think it depends on your table, but I think it could work for any table provided it actually has something relevant to add to the game. And on top of that, lots and lots and lots of characters are designed for this type of stuff. And we never really make proper use of those skills. So think about your rangers and that kind of stuff and your druids. Those are characters characters that are purpose built for this kind of a thing, right? Elves always are supposed to have an easier
and
time
when we're
with
talking
this.
about following the path too, a lot of times you assume that it's like, okay, well, you can follow the road. You know how to get here and there. You have a direction sense. Not like you think, well, this is finding the best route.
Well, not only that, but land nav is a skill. And I've been backpacking a long time. I've been lost. I've been lost several times. Not necessarily, I wouldn't say, I don't know if lost is the right word. I've been off trail and been like, I'm somewhere in this place. So I got to find this hill to have an idea of which exactly I'm supposed to, because it's not always easy, right? So I agree 100%. And I think this is
even with a printed simple map of like, this is the trail. This is where it intersects other trails. You can be like, well, it doesn't quite like it does on here.
That's a great example though. So when I'm doing land nav and that kind of stuff, I'm using a modern topographical map that is like accurate down to,
This is like Joe Bob, who's done a lot of walking, drew it for you.
None of my maps said here there be dragons. Okay, so but I think it's totally relevant because I don't know how I never made this connection. There are so many skills and moments that are great for characters that this is where they're supposed to shine. Because how many times have you thought, oh, there's a ranger? Well, that's cool. It's like a weaker fighter.
Yeah,
neat. But
he's a lot better with a bow.
Like okay, great. So you lost some hit points, and okay, whatever. But they're just not they don't have that strength. Whereas if you put them in this situation, then it is 100% relevant because these rangers and these druids are going to be the ones that are like the superheroes of the moment to say this is how we survive this. Yeah. And on top of that, I think I would go so far as to say if you have a ranger or druid in the party that have these skills and it's part of their background that they have done all this travel and back and forth through the real wilderness and through the bush, that they should be able to make checks with bonuses to lift people's spirits and to keep them on the right track, right?
I think it would also make sense to say that if you have those people in your party, you can expect your journeys to take the amount of time that people say it will take.
Right.
And if you don't, then you may have to expect that you're going to take longer. And if you make time a factor in whatever you're doing adventure-wise, then the difference between, a day and a half spent because you got a little off track is a big, big difference.
Right. Well, and then it's kind of weird because our views of distance are because of car travel, right? And especially here in the U.S. because we drive all over the place, right? But so the most miles I have put down in one day is when I did the Tecumseh Trail, and I did, I think, 24 miles in one day. And my backpack is, I'm telling you what, I humped it. It was a long day. And my pack only weighs 27 pounds plus 2 liters of water. So water's 8 pounds per gallon, whatever that comes out to be, right? And so I'm not carrying armor and sword and ammunition. I'm not super light, not ultra light, but I'm packed pretty light. It's pretty conservative. And so, man, the next day I got up and I was like, oh man, my feet were sore. I was okay, but it was not pleasant. And that's 24 miles, backcountry hiking and that kind of stuff. So it's just something to put that in the back of your head for what this actually does to a character, especially when you're thinking, oh, what's my encumbrance? Now I don't want to get down into counting pounds and ounces, and I've got 12 arrows and a quiver, and like I'm not up for that, right? But I think games like Morkborg and LOTFP have done a good job with encumbrance to sort of factor it in, and that's what that's how much distance you can make and that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot to gain there. So I don't know how deep down the hiking rabbit hole you want to go, but there's lots of resources out there if you want to see how long you can actually travel, right? At the same time, I say that my longest day I had was that 24-mile day. The shortest day I had was in New Mexico, 5 miles as the crow flies in one day, because we had to go up a mountain and down the other side. So it was like switchbacks back and forth all the way up the top, then switchbacks back and forth all the way down. And we made 5 miles of progress forward, but it was all day and it was a hard day. So just, keep that in mind. Like, we'll just look at the terrain. We think, oh, there's a mountain there. That's easy. Well, no, it's a whole different world, right? So.
Well, and I think an interesting trail challenge for mountains, who doesn't make their pathfinding check or whatever, there's a possibility that an entire path could be washed out or could have crumbled and fallen. And then you have to find another route, or you have to make a climb check to go around this location.
Oh, yeah.
Or, if there's ice. Do you have picks? Do you have, shoes for this? Are you equipped for that? If not, how are you planning on making it across? Are you going to have a rope, or are you going to send somebody first?
I can tell you, I done a couple water crossings where there was a fast stream underneath us, right? And you're standing, it was aircraft cable, like metal, corded wire, one to stand on and one to hold on to. So you got one below your feet where you stand, and my foot slipped off and my foot was in the water. My boot got wet from it, right? So that's how high, so you're not super high off the water. right? And we had some rain the past couple days before, so the water was up a little bit, but not a ton, right? And then I've got one that's sort of like somewhere between like, shoulder high that you kind of, push lean on, and you just sort of shimmy slide across, and that's carrying. I had a heavy pack at that time because I didn't understand ultralight packing, but not easy, you know.
And if your weather is going to be a factor, like amount of rain, you may have to camp a day and wait for the water to go down before good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, right?
Yeah. Well, especially if you live near areas that have larger rivers, right? So we're like within
well, in medieval times, that's almost everywhere, right? Because if you don't have water,
right? Oh yeah,
you don't have a town.
But there's a big difference between crossing something that's like the Wabash River, right? Well, even the distance between that and like the Mississippi, where those are pretty big differences. But the Wabash, huge. So how are you going to carry a 40-pound pack?
How are you going to carry armor?
Well, crazy story. I actually have a picture of a guy back floating in a suit of chainmail. So some armor is more suitable to it than others, but I digress.
One of the things I liked from Lord of the Rings is the ferry crossing at the beginning. You're trying to escape and the rush to the ferry. And that could be something cool to incorporate then, because when you're talking about rivers and the difficulty they present.
Scenes. Oh, yeah.
Well, but there's a lot, back then there's designated places where there are river crossings and it's not a bridge,
right?
Well, maybe a couple places it is, but ferries are a big deal.
We have all these things about lightly armored characters not having much of an advantage because they're more vulnerable in combat, right? But if you're just wearing leathers and furs, you can totally swim that. Whereas if I'm being chased down by that ring wraith, what if he's just a giant knight on a huge warhorse, big metal armor? We get to the river, bloop, I'm in the drink swimming away. What's he gonna do? Stand there, take off the armor? You know what I mean? Like, come on, okay, cool.
10 rounds later.
Right, I'll see you in a couple, about 10 minutes. Sounds good. So I think there's some cool opportunities there to where that equipment, the choices for that equipment should matter. There's a reason why Rangers aren't running around in full plate mail, right? And those choices should matter. I think this is a rabbit hole I could go down. I didn't even realize backpacking stuff. That's crazy. I'm such a moron.
So I think, I don't know next on the Borg list, but I don't know if this is on there at all, but equipment failure, I think, is another thing you have to talk about, just in mundane tragedies, right? That falls in there with weather and everything else, so broken wagon wheels, that's kind of a trope. But what about, food that goes rancid or gets
horses that come up lame.
Yeah, horses that come up lame, or
raccoons
problems
that
with
steal
shoes.
Your food.
Yeah, I was going to say something steals your food, like, rats eat your food, or a chipmunk gets, into your stuff while you're sleeping, or raccoons, or
I think
whatever.
It might depend on the kind of game that you're playing. So if we're playing LOTFP, and I've hiked through bear country, and you do not mess with bears because, well, pretty defenseless creatures, right? And so LOTFP is a little more close. It's pretty grim, right? So if a bear shows up to take your food, probably going to be like, okay, bear.
you have that. Right. I brought it for you, actually. Funny story.
We're going to go over here while you eat our food that we brought for you, right? Whereas if it's in a D&D style game, maybe depending on what level your characters are, a bear isn't a significant challenge. It's just sort of a nothing encounter, right? But they have all kinds of stuff that's going to attract all kinds of creatures. So
it's still that I've encountered. Like, nobody's ever been like, and there's a bear eating your food. Like, what?
Right. Well, and then it could be, that's another interesting moment for our rangers and our druids to shine, to say, hey, stand back. Don't hurt the bear. I got this, right?
Right.
So
let me come with the beat.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, so that, even broken backpack straps, like that would be a pain in the butt,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's all kinds of mundane things that can happen. Or, maybe you're trying to find water. This kind of falls somewhere in between, but you're trying to find water. And if you failed that check, you found water only to find out tomorrow you got diarrhea.
Bad water. Oh, yeah. Well, and water's a funny thing, too, because so on that trip I did where I did the 24-mile day, that day I was having trouble finding water. I mean, I was still sweating, and that kind of stuff. I was in the area where it's in danger, but not in crisis yet. And finding water is not easy. It's not as easy as you would think. And it's the most important piece of all of this. So if you're playing in a more realistic or grim game where you can't just cast this water, it's, you sort of have to base your trail around where the water pickups are. How many times have you been
like, okay, well, you have a water skin or a wine skin. You're good. How much water is fitting in that wine skin? Like, you actually need a fair amount in a day.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then on top of that, places where...
Sorry, I have to eyes.
So the trail that I went and did, there was supposed to be creeks that were full of water for me to make water pickups on, right? Because I have water filters and stuff, right? They were all bone dry. I was down to a point of where I was standing, taking a break, looking at I have a picture of it. It looked so bad. A pool of probably the worst looking stagnant water, of me staring at it and debating, should I don't know, doing the debate. Do I drink this water? Do I get it? Because I've got filters and stuff, but do I do it? And then talk about equipment failure. I had the bag that I fill the water full of failed on me. So then I've got redundancy, which your character should know to have that at some point. So I have bleach tablets, and they taste like terrible, but they're there. Mm-hmm. So it's something to go back to equipment, so you're not trying to track every little piece of repairing equipment. Say you just have a general travel repair kit, because that's really sort of what you have, and it has whatever it is, 2 or 3 uses, right? So then it's just a thing. Okay, we had this failure. I've got it. It's not going to be ideal, but I can make it work till we get down the road to whatever, right? So, you don't necessarily need to get bogged down in the weed completely, but it's another cool moment to sort of have to go through or whatever. Talk about morale checks and kind of stuff. Really, that's probably the best way to apply this sort of a D&D and OSR version of this, is to say, when you have an encounter now with monsters or creatures or whatever it is, you're going to be, your morale check is going to be penalized, because why? Well, you've spent 4 hard days on the road in the pouring rain. It's brutally hot. You just don't have that same desire that you had until you get some rest. So go ahead. You can go.
Who's the time?
Okay, so all that said,
so they're doing
no. So that's just a quick list on there, and I think weather is a cool one. Now, and then it has you roll to see what happens. So like another thing that they have is what does the road look like, which we already kind of talked about. So their version of it here is almost forgotten dirt track near a wagon track used by farmers. Tracks drawn up by wild beasts or savage monsters. A once well maintained trade road now fallen into disrepair. A well used road or a paved. So we have a pretty big spectrum from like a deer path all the way down to like a Roman road, right? So just keep that in mind, that there's a lot of choices you can have in terms of what the road looks like, right? And then on this one they have a chart.
I like the idea of a forked path, like a choice, right? I haven't had anybody do that to me either. Like, okay, well this road wasn't actually supposed to split, so now which way are you going? This is a little more worn, this one is a little less, and I think that's interesting.
So this one has some cool things in here. It has just events on the road, so there's some interesting things here, and it's in the Morkborg world, so just keep that in mind. One of my favorite encounters that we've actually had that came off of this table is just encountering dead bodies on the road, and they had weird things on them. A couple of them had like a couple unlabeled vials. One of them that was like red and turned green. It was liquid that would change color, and people were like, "What in the heck is this?" So there was some interesting moments, but a couple of them that are on here is 2 dead bodies on the side of the road, and then you're gonna roll for what they have. Abandoned graveyard. There's an ambush on here. A crossroad. A battle has actually happened between a band of flayed cultists and a tribe of Earthbound. So you're not the only bad guys or good guys that are out there, right? There's other people that exist in the world, and then the world isn't even along. Farmers, slavers, a funeral procession, a religious procession, ruins of a castle, monastery, bunch of food that's spoiled on the side of the road. You're carrying bad food, you just pitch it off to the side, whatever it is, the road forks, weather change, weather turns worse, and then obviously nothing. But the religious processions and that kind of stuff, if you're playing in a historic LOCFP world, there was loads of different groups of like flagellant stuff that would travel from town to town and all kinds of craziness that happened. So there's a lot of cool potential there. But there's the one thing that I think is the coolest thing about this, we kind of hit on a little bit. One of the tables is when you spend a day searching for food and water. There's a specific thing for that. So we're out of food. We've got to stay here a day, and we're just going to go search for food and water. Here's the camp. We're all going to connoiter back. And there's a table for that. Table for small villages. Table for when you leave the road after a half day's journey, you encounter, and then you roll on this table. So I don't know. And this, what I think is interesting is not to put shots at any game, but this is 3 pieces of paper, essentially. Really 2, because this is a map for their world. There's 2 pieces of paper here that are basically just a couple tables that already have more sort of built into them than a lot of games do that is actually used in overland travel, right? So I know the D&D book has, the Player's Handbook or the DMG has lots of stuff in there, but the reality is it doesn't get used. It kind of gets overlooked. And I think part of that is because there's so much there, right? We're so focused on the dungeon and the dragon that we forget the journey to get there.
Well, you're focused on your main plot, and you're like, okay, well, let's hurry up and get through this so I can get to the next thing that I plan, I would like to add to that, though, that I like the idea of NPs along the way that, again, in some capacity, and your interaction will impact the way future encounters go. So just think of your stereotypical, like, Beauty and the Beast, right? The old witch at the door, he ends up cursed and all this stuff. Or, hell, it's even in the Bible, right? You have like, oh, well, that was really God, and he saw how you treated that beggar, and, and this became of it, or, what have you.
Well, and then how many traveling merchants are there? Like, escort this merchant to town X, as like the classic first level adventure, right?
Right.
So you could have these perpetual encounters with a merchant that you either have a good relationship or a bad relationship, right? Think about Breath of the Wild, Zelda.
Right. Yeah,
What's that guy's name? Beetle or whatever?
Yeah.
I see him all over God and creation, and I'm like, how did you get over here?
The painter guy, like, oh, I see we meet again.
Right. So I think you're 100% right. If you want to incorporate, not even if you want to, you should incorporate NPCs into some of these encounters. And then if you're going to bother making an NPC, give them a name, give them a couple motivations.
They don't always have to recur, but it would be interesting if occasionally they did.
Right.
Or maybe we come back in the region again and I see that same person again later. So, reward your players for good interactions and punish them for the bad ones.
No, I agree. So like what happens when they rob that merchant and murder him? Well, guess what?
Maybe later you need to buy a ship to go somewhere and all of a sudden...
Well, I wasn't even necessarily going to go there. What about the next time you're traveling to places, encounter a merchant, and guess what he has with him? Loads of guards and traps. And, because they're people, they're smart, they want to survive, they want to do well, and keep that in mind so that it brings those encounters to life. And also it will bring consequences to your player's action, which will make them twice about the
Well, I also think it would be interesting to say that not all are mundane zero-level humans.
True.
So that person you may have treated badly, that may be a cleric.
Right.
Maybe he's sworn a vow of poverty and he just looks dusty, but when you go to hit him up later for some healing, he's like, how about no?
Right. Or what about if it's the merchant that's making this trip?
Even,
Because, well, they're incredibly powerful, but this trip had to happen and I didn't have anybody to do it. So guess what? Sometimes you're out there doing the job because you got to do it or whatever. Or what if the road has been being ambushed for some time? So now it's a group of actual adventurers posing like merchants carrying a crappy wagon with a donkey to try and bait these bandits out, right? There's lots and lots and lots of potential there to make, because I guess what you're going for is to just keep the encounters fresh and keep your players on their toes so they don't think, oh, well, it's just another merchant, whatever, like, oh, let's see, I've got to restock my arrows. Does he have healing potion? That kind of stuff, right? Well, do you have anything to add to the wind up here or wrap this? That happens at the beginning.
I think.
So I do have one quick question for you. So what we talked about here and focused on a lot of this is about making this journey from point A to point B more interesting and giving it flavor and making it matter to the game, right?
Right.
That's not what's happening in Lord of the Rings. It shows crazy journeys they have to go on, how hard it is, how they have to persevere, and all that kind of stuff. You think it's worth focusing on that, or should we say the journey's hard? You went through hell to get here.
Well, no, but we did talk about that, right? Because part of the reason why the journey sucks, one, time, but two, the terrain and the weather and fatigue and they lose their food along the way and they go to hunt something and that turns out to be the king's rabbit or whatever, and they get captured. They go down the wrong path and end up in a spider's nest, and some of that stuff does happen away.
I think it's also important to mention that there's never only one path to get somewhere. You might have to go way out of your way, but unless it's a mountain pass and that's the only pass for miles and like for hundreds of miles, there's always another way. Right. The next river crossing
there's a snow avalanche, so you have to go through Mines Moria instead.
Exactly. See? But like if you're doing a river crossing and this is not the safe place to cross, or we get ran off the road because there's bandits or whatever it is, well, it may take us extra time, but I can go 30 miles down the river to the next village and there's another river crossing there. There's always another route. So I guess if you're going to incorporate this and make it harder and sort of a little more difficult than your players, just make sure they also understand that this is not the only path they can take. If they choose to take another path, it may add more time, it may make things more difficult, but it's not only a road from point A to point B. There's another way.
Right. As it's difficult, it's fast.
Right.
Fast and difficult, or slow and easy. Which
True story. Right on. All right, so I think we'll wrap that one up here. As you know, I'm a member of the Gonna Geek Network, so you can check out all the other geek content at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. And if you like what we do here at Just More Fix, you can support us at patreon.com/JustMoreFix and join our other awesome patrons to get access to our pre-shows and raw audio feeds, as well as early access to our episodes and our zine in PDF or print format, depending on what level you support at. And join the awesome ranks of our Patreon supporters like Tiziano Furlano, Hector Trelane, Timothy Barra, Paul Hubbard, Alistair H., Simon McNair, Alan White, and the OG Todd Olson. I think that'll do it for us, and we'll next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.